There are absolute things we can do that change the world in a way that actually fits us, instead of a way that negatively impacts us or sends us down a road that kind of all of us look forward and go like, well, I don't want to go towards this. This isn't what I want the world to be like. I want it to be different.
It's important to be part of a union because you have to have a voice.
Welcome to Union Talk. I'm Randi Weingarten.
I'm Randi Weingarten, and welcome to our first episode of Union Talk for this new year, for 2026. It does feel like the last 4 weeks has been 4 years, and I want to actually start just by acknowledging that it's been a really difficult few weeks for Americans. And as a union, we are doing everything we can to stand with Minnesotans to ensure that our members and our communities have what they need to be safe and protect themselves, their students, their patients, and frankly, as Minnesota has been asking, over 50,000 strong, they want ICE out of their communities, as do most people in America, watching that ICE and this administration has been much too aggressive, and there has been this terrible abuse of power as seen through the deaths of at least 2 American citizens. It's a real inflection point for our nation, and we are witnessing Americans coming together to stand up for democracy and for our freedoms and to push back against this kind of degradation of dignity and humanity and abuse of power. Now, that wasn't what we were going to talk about today, and the rest of today will be on the topic that we were going to talk about, but I think on a week where activists and journalists have been arrested and where American citizens have been killed for nonviolently protesting the taking of their neighbors, that we need to actually call it for what it is, which is a degradation and abuse of power and something completely contrary to what our Constitution envisioned our federal government to do. Now, part of the reason that we have the federal government we have is because of the anger in America. And part of that anger, to really understand that anger, we really have to talk to people who have actually suffered the situation in America right now, which is that it's too damn expensive. And the promise of America that I'm in my 60s. I'm not going to disclose, unless they want to, our other guests, what their ages are. But when I grew up, we were basically taught this notion that if you worked hard and played by the rules, you and your family would succeed. And that success meant the American dream. And that American dream could be whatever you wanted it to be. But it certainly was a ladder to a middle-class lifestyle. If you became a profession, whether it be doctors or lawyers or teachers or nurses or manufacturing or a worker in manufacturing, there was a sense that that was the bounty of America and that all were welcome. Remember the Statue of Liberty in the harbor of the city that I live in. But that's not what's happening today. Today, and the conversation we're about to have, Gen Z in particular, our young people, they don't feel that promise is real or attainable. And today's conversation strikes at the heart of so much of this Because if you look at and listen to for 1 nanosecond the anxieties and the hopes of young people, as I said, Gen Z in particular, have come of age in a moment of great economic and political tumult, huge technological changes, a fractured media environment. The American dream is slipping further and further out of reach. And so to unpack all of this, I was so delighted to be able to have two of our members who are a couple of years younger than I am, and John Della Volpe, who is the director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics. And they're with us for John to talk about the findings, which he has done a lot publicly, of the 51st Harvard Youth Poll, which surveyed about over 2,000 young Americans between 18 and 29 years old nationwide. I read the poll. I immediately said we wanted to do an episode like this to unpack the results, but do it through the lens of some of our own members, like Zac Coe, a high school teacher in Fairfax County, Virginia, and Madison Eckhart, a nurse in Alaska who works in a critical care step-down unit. So I'm really, really, really just so delighted that you are here with us today. And I'm going to start with John in terms of giving us the skinny on the poll, and then also turn it over to Zac and Madison to talk about, whether these results resonate with you and your experiences and your peers. But I'm going to start with John. So why don't you give us, I know they've been publicized all over this time, the highlights and the findings of this poll, and frankly also whether or not this time it surprised you.
Thanks so much, Randy, for this conversation and to kind of engage Madison and Zac. My job as a pollster, I try to think of myself as a professional listener and trying to kind of listen and sometimes quantify, kind of the views and the attitudes, the opinions, and the experiences, most importantly, of younger people who sometimes, too often, I don't think have a voice, right? So we've been doing this for 25 years. I don't know if it surprised me. We're talking to a lot of young people all the time, but the overarching, I think, finding, well, not surprising, certainly I think disturbing, is that this is a generation that is still trying to make sense of a world that's fractured and unpredictable. Okay, I think there are four major takeaways from this. One of which is the instability rules the world that Gen Z is living in right now. Right? Only 13%, was that 1 in 8 or so, believe the U.S. is headed in the right direction. 3 out of 5, 60% said it's on the wrong track. And Randy, this was conducted in the fall-winter of last year. So unlikely these numbers have gotten better over the last couple of months, right? Right? Why is that? Because economic insecurity is just central to who they are, right? There's a couple different ways. I could talk to you about statistics. I can tell you that 40+% they are struggling financially or barely getting by. Or I can tell you that I do not remember the time, it's been years since I've conducted a focus group anywhere in the country where a member or two of that focus group has not told me a story about themselves, or someone close to them being homeless or being on the verge of being homeless. That to me is sadly really what economic instability means. We're not even having the conversation about the American dream in a home, in a fence, and those things. We're talking about day to day, trying to keep a roof over your head and not having to, kind of move back in with parents or couch surf. So that's one thing. The economic instability. Second is, and I think this is something that's new over the last year, is the AI as a source of anxiety. We're seeing kind of laid on top of the overall direction of the world, the economic factors as well. A significant number of young Americans believe, certainly more than half believe that, AI is going to be a threat to their job prospects. And what we found in the survey is it really didn't matter what part of the economy, what your level of education was, your socioeconomic background. AI is a concern. They don't feel like they're voices heard regarding the day-to-day economic instability, and they don't believe that government has their back in terms of the guardrails necessary for AI. The other two things quickly is we're sadly seeing, continued lack of faith, lack of trust in institutions. We see that kind of politically. We've known that for a while. But again, this speaks to who has the back of Gen Z. It's very, very challenging. I'm not saying this because I'm on your podcast, but one of the only groups of Americans are teachers and librarians and actually, local doctors and nurses, actually. So really well represented. But this is important because the folks that we're having this conversation with literally are among the most trusted people in America, in society, in communities. And we need to appreciate that, I think, and what that means. And especially because I've been traveling this past week doing focus groups. I'm in Florida this week. And the concern that I have is the fraying of social trust. And that I think younger people as well as older people, they're carrying a lot, right? They're carrying the economic instability, the concerns about the future, lack of trust in institutions. And now we're seeing kind of repercussions that too many folks are having when they speak out. And not just for the fear for physical safety, but also fear for economic safety, job safety, because of people taking names and photographs of who's protesting where. So the idea of this fraying social trust is something that I'm quite concerned about, that there aren't a lot of places where people feel comfortable having meaningful conversations about the things that are stressing them out. And that's just something else I think that ties into kind of the overall framework about this life feeling fractured and unpredictable right now.
Thank you so much, John. One of the reasons that we have been focused like a laser on taking cases that are protecting the First Amendment rights of our members, particularly to speak out when they're not in their work settings, is exactly for what you just said, John. That's why we're taking this case in Texas, and we're very focused on these cases other places because we want that social trust that teachers and nurses have, that educators and healthcare professionals have. We don't want people to feel, we want people who want to speak out to feel like they are backed up not only by their union in terms of their associational rights, but that we are actually making sure that we don't just say, trust me. We're making sure that we can be backed up by legal cases, because it is a very, very, very scary time. And I'm seeing the social trust be frayed, and also the intimidation being out there when you see the arrests like you did in the last few days of journalists and of activists. But this kind of combination of what I'm hearing you say, and then I'm going to go to both Zac and Madison, but this combination of economic issues, technological issues, social issues, all coming together in a way that with a flashing neon light of instability and insecurity. And it doesn't feel like there's anybody home who's actually, in a position of power, who's actually trying to congeal society together and bring us together. But what we're seeing is a cauldron raging even more and more and more, is what I think I'm hearing as well, that's creating even more of this erosion of social trust. Did I get that right or no?
100% on point. And the last thing I'd add to that is what that means is it's creating mental health crises up and down the seaboard and across the country in significant ways, especially with younger people, many of whom spend their time with young children who also have anxiety. So it's a complicated and dangerous time.
Thank you, John, for just giving us kind of like the 30,000 foot sense of what has happened. If people want to see the poll, there was an amazing Substack that John has done on this, and all one has to do is, do a search that says Harvard Youth Poll, and you're going to find it, as opposed to me giving the entire site. So, Zac, I'm going to you first, and then Madison. So, What say you about these results? Like, what do you think about them? They resonate for you? What about your peer groups? What do you think?
Yeah. This to me, it's always wonderful to get an incredibly well thought out, prestigious poll that like completely confirms all of your priors, right? This really speaks to the way that I feel when I talk to my friends. It speaks to the way that they feel. I mean, I'm in the classroom, so the AI stuff hits me a lot. I'm lucky. I teach math. AI still sucks at math, so I'm spared the worst of it. But
And what grade do you teach, Zac? I'm sorry, I
teach
should have
high
introduced
school
that.
math.
Okay.
So I teach this year a wide variety of kids, some younger, some older, and as much as I warn them against these tools, to a lot of them, I think it's the easiest path forward. And these AI companies, I mean, all of their profitability is basically based on kids cheating. Like you can watch their revenue charts take a nosedive in the summer. And that's because it's all kids in college, kids in high school cheating on their homework. And, if it stays like that, I think, the truth is that even if that makes my life worse, it's going to be better for all of us. I mean, I think, the worries around AI and the feelings of lack of trust in institutions, I think there's a shared root cause, which is that, the people who we look to in government to provide a sense of stability. I mean, you said it, nobody's home. Right? Where are these people? We've seen time and time again in our lives with like Uber creating this like massive epidemic of gig work that displaces like local unionized workforces, right? I worry, when I look at, all of these AI companies that are so highly valued, what does that actually mean? To me, that means that the market believes that they are going to be able to, monopolize, what's the term? Like monopolize like kind of low level, entry level, white collar labor. And that's what a lot of the pitches are. And we're just careening towards a world where I don't really feel any confidence that if, next year OpenAI comes out with an AI agent that will basically cause the post-college, employment rate to totally plummet, and all of the money that would have gone to the people who, live in this country, and that's just funneled straight into OpenAI or whoever figures it out first. No one's going to stop that. They're just going to let it happen. There's too much fear around affecting the profitability of these companies. And, on both sides, I really feel, zero trust that anything would be done to stop that. So that's definitely something that I, look at and I just go like, who's going to put a stop to the madness?
So you're really focused on the technological changes that are happening with AI without there being any kind of guardrails whatsoever in America these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I'm hearing you say very, very, very clearly, you and your peers. And you're right, AI is pretty terrible at math right now, but I would say it's, not terribly good at any kind of thinking.
Yes.
Regurgitating of information, yes. But thinking, it might just be that we might have a renaissance in critical thinking because of what it does and doesn't do, or basically what it doesn't do.
I certainly hope so. That'd be nice.
Yeah, it might be. It just might be. I've been saying a lot, and then I'm going to go to Madison, that, this whole thing that we've been doing for the last 20 years in education, which is knowledge acquisition, AI basically makes that memorization meaningless because kids can cut and paste, in a nanosecond from any of these generative AI tools. But, what they can't do is the critical thinking, the applied reasoning, the problem solving, what you do as a teacher, Zac, AI can't replicate that. And in some ways, it's going to make what you do as a teacher even more important. In some ways, if we have the political leadership we need to actually guide this in the right way, as opposed to the wild, wild west. But
absolutely,
we've been spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to do that in different states. But thank you. And Madison, I spent a lot of time with nurses in Alaska, and people have been speaking up a lot. I'm so delighted to see you on this podcast. But what say you about the results? Do they resonate with you? Do they resonate with your peers? What do you think?
Yeah. So when you were speaking earlier about young people entering the job market and trying to find meaningful work these days, I thought about my parents and how they instructed me to enter the job market. My parents very much emphasized that I should enter a career with job security and economic opportunity that would allow me to buy a house, buy cars. And until fairly recently, I felt like I had made a good choice in becoming a nurse. Until recently, I felt like I had entered a career where there was stability and where I would have, endless job opportunities regardless of where I lived or what specialty I wanted to be in it as a nurse. And I don't believe that is the case anymore. I've seen now in my workplace at Providence, Alaska Medical Center, a number of trends in nursing care and in care models that the hospital is instituting that they point to a reduced reliance on skilled labor and an increased reliance on unskilled labor and very cheap unskilled labor. And they've also implemented experimental technologies that have already, just in the last year, been used to reduce the number of bedside nurses taking care of patients. So the threat of displacement of nurses in healthcare is very, very pertinent right now. Unfortunately, my coworkers are still they don't still quite believe me when I say that AI is going to replace us. They still have some skepticism. I'm not very hopeful that they're correct. In fact, I don't even know that I'm quite as hopeful as you, Randy, that that the AI is going to have limited capabilities in terms of autonomy and critical thinking and navigating of difficult decisions. I think that is absolutely in the cards for the future. And even, industry leaders in AI that discuss new technologies, specifically in healthcare, point to agentic AI as the industry goals. And once we have agentic AI implemented in healthcare spaces, there will be a very, very limited need for nurses.
Do you want to tell everybody what agentic AI is?
Yeah. So as a nurse, my training leans on my critical thinking skills and my critical judgment, right? So I assess a patient. I have instincts about what that patient needs. Those instincts are driven by my experience taking care of patients and also my clinical knowledge. And all of those things combined allow me to, make judgment calls for patients, make a plan of care, request additional orders from the provider, and kind of drive the care for patients. I do believe that agentic AI will have, and this, the definition of agentic AI, as far as I understand it, is that it's an AI model that has authority and that is able to make decisions based on an input of information. So it's not just siphoning information and, spitting out a summary, kind of like a language learning model, but it's actually has authority, it has intuition, and, it can drive decision making. Once that technology is in place, even if it's still experimental, even if it's imperfect, even if the public is not educated about its use, hospitals will attempt to utilize that technology to warrant a reduction in staff, and nurses will become more or less obsolete. And this is why I wanted to focus on this increased reliance on, more lower skilled workers, low paid, low skilled workers. In the nursing space, we call them unlicensed personnel. These are, they're nurse aides. Sometimes they're certified. They have a certification, but they're not licensed. Most of the time, unlicensed personnel or these nurse aides are very young. They're fresh out of school. This is their first job. They very much fit into this demographic of people that we're talking about here today. And I work with them every day, and I see on their face just this shock of the abysmal conditions that we work under. And it's so sad to see them come in fresh, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, thinking that they want to be a nurse and thinking that this type of work is going to add purpose to their life and be meaningful. And then for them to see that, in fact, we work for institutions that do not allow us to care for patients in the ways that we were trained and in the ways that we feel we are morally obligated to do. And now they're faced with the idea, well, do I attempt to go into this high-paying job that, seems right now that it will offer me some job security and stability, but at the cost of great moral injury? It's an impossible task. It's an impossible task now for them to decide what to do with their lives, what's meaningful, what is going to, are they going to enter a career that even exists anymore? There's so many unknowns.
Yeah. I do think both of you are right about the footprint of AI right now. And I think that part of the dilemma is that the Trump administration is pushing for complete autonomy and authority without any kind of guardrails, and attempted to stop states from doing any kind of guardrails. And I think that I'm wondering, John, did that show up a lot in the polling that you did? Because it's certainly top of mind for both Zac and Madison.
Yes, and it is becoming, I think, more relevant every single day. I think this is an example of really why the Harvard Youth Poll, Randi, has been so important over the last couple of decades, because these are the questions shaped by our students. Right? And those students' questions are shaped by the communities, and we extend ourselves well beyond the Harvard community, of course, to conduct focus groups and other things. So this is something I think we're literally hearing, like from Madison and from Zac, right, from the ground up. And what we're trying to do is quantify that. And I think this conversation and those polling questions, in many ways, I think, and I hope will drive greater awareness of what this generation is asking for, because I don't want to speak for Zac and Madison, but I bet that you believe that, Congress and our leaders in Washington, our institutions, could have done more to protect the downside of social media a generation ago, right? And now's this opportunity today to try to kind of address this in real time. 100%.
I think they both
100% agree. Yeah.
So I hope what we can do in terms of the next set of questions, because I think both of you really in talking about AI, both of you made clear why people have such a negative feeling about the politicians in this country, regardless of party, that and John just said it, we saw what happened in terms of social media and with the immunity clauses. And we were pretty close even last year at this, or even in December 2024, to getting some changes in the national laws on social media. And Meta came in and broke that up. We got it passed in the Senate, 98-2. And Meta came in and just killed the revisions of COPPA and COPA. And, all the guardrails that we push so hard for, can't get any of that done in this administration. In fact, the one thing we did get done was to stop them from preempting state legislation for the next 10 years. So I'm totally with you in terms of the issues of, can they do more? And they haven't done more. And that creates a lot of mistrust. But John said something earlier about the poll results that really do affect both and really involve both Zac and Madison in terms of who you are to our communities. And so I want to take a minute just to see, do you think, could we do any work as a union? Can we do any work as, a group of friends, Zac, or a group of friends, Madison? Because our professions, your professions are still so trusted by regular people in America. Do you think there's something that we can do as a union to try to counteract this? Maybe it's voting, maybe it's, other kinds of work, maybe it's protests like what's going on in Minnesota. But do you think that all is lost, or is there something that we can do? I'll start with you, Zac.
Sure. I mean, I will say, relative to where I was, a couple of years ago before I started union work, I feel a lot more, even though I'm more aware of the things and, all the horrible things that are going on, right to work, Citizens United, these things, like I'm certainly more aware than I was 2 years ago. But having gotten involved with union work and, that being funneled also through teaching work, I've developed a real sense of optimism. I think it's really hard to find agency. I think money has gotten into politics a lot, and that's really broken down a lot of is my vote really as important as a billionaire's vote that comes with $100 million in campaign contributions? Well, obviously no, right? But seeing a part of the process and then being able to go out into, even my, kind of smaller community of just personal friends that I have, it's really powerful to see the resonance. I think there is an equally positive sentiment both for teaching work and union work, right? People are really interested to hear that I'm a part of the union. They're really interested to hear these things. And even, things like a local vote for things like like a school board or a board of supervisors, which again, 2 years ago, I would have been like, what? You want me to leave my house and go out and vote for this, whatever municipal stuff? Now people come to me and they're like, where should I vote? What should I do? How do we make change? Right? I think there's a lot of hunger for people to actually be a part of something that does anything. And, I think a lot of, I do, and my friends, we live in New York, we see Mom Donnie, that's my goat, not to get too Gen Z on here, but that's like, and we see that as being something powerful and a driving force in a movement that really, makes me think that something can be done. I think we've spent a lot of basically my entire life, especially my politically aware life, being told, well, you can't do that. That's not possible, right? There's nothing that we can do here. That would be irresponsible. That's not what we want to do. That, oh, well, that would be nice for you, but that would have downstream impacts that are too hard to deal with. And, to see the ability to get involved locally, take what ultimately, like compared to the national scale, I'm really not that much different than I was before I got involved with union work, right? All I'm trying to do is make my community a better place than it was a year ago. But people see that and they get enthused. And I think as we continue to go forward, if we can bring that energy and bring that vitality, hey, we used to operate in this way, right? And even for things like Citizens United, that was like so recent. That was 2010. That was so recent within my lifetime. There are absolutely things we can do that change the world in a way that actually fits us instead of a way that negatively impacts us or sends us down a road that kind of all of us look forward and go like, well, I don't want to go towards this. This isn't what I want the world to be like. I want it to be different. So I think, the union as a kind of a massive overarching thing, and of course, as a bunch of individual locals, right, has a massive ability to affect that change in individuals and in communities.
Thank you, Zac. Madison, what are you thinking?
I think that it's easy to feel hopeless right now. It's easy to feel put down. And obviously, I'm not alone in how I feel about the direction of the country and the direction of the economy and labor markets. I don't think that we should view the degradation and dismantling of the standard of work as inevitable. Obviously, labor unions across history have proven that it's not inevitable that your workplace is going to be unsafe and at the whim of of your overlords, of your corporate overlord to destroy it. I think it's important for people to find, young people specifically, to find meaning in their life outside of work. Of course, I think we should still strive to enter careers that give us some degree of meaning and purpose. But I think that people should also have hobbies and have social groups that they care about that add meaning to their life and fills their cup up so that they can, fight harder at work for what they deserve as workers. I still think that despite the direction of AI and how scary it is, I still think that humans are more important than AI. And I think young people should remember that.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've been working for about a year to get a curriculum written with industry and with educators in manufacturing. And we've been working with people in the World Economic Forum. So I was in Switzerland I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. I was struck by how many of these titans of industry had a very different view about AI this year than they've done before. They were much less cheerleading it than they were before. What Madison just said about the human being, I heard over and over again. I was actually struck. I expected them to, want the titans there to want to do exactly what Zac and Madison were talking about in terms of AI. And they were much more cautious about it. And I heard them, not just me, talk a lot about the human being has to be at the center. John, what were you going to say?
Speaking of the human being at the center, I think one unique opportunity we all have, especially as researchers and organizers and teachers and nurses, is to re-engage young people, but also re-engage other members of our communities in bringing them together in having meaningful conversations. We see in the Harvard survey, Randi, 47%, half of this generation, fears and avoid political conversations. Another half feels judged for those conversations. And I spend several days a month, as I said, traveling the country and having these focus groups or mini town halls with people representative, Democrats and Republicans and independents. In every single group, people walk in saying they're kind of concerned, stepping on eggshells, not too sure if they want to participate. And they all leave by asking, when can I do this again, right? Because we're finding that we have far more in common than that divide us. And that they can see each other's, kind of reflected in other people's views and families. And I think that, to me, is one of the best tools that we all have to create these safer spaces. Universities and public schools and hospitals and other places, they give people an opportunity to kind of see each other, make these connections, and to try to find out, how to build an infrastructure, right, that can stand up to some of the forces that are kind of taking us to a pretty dark place.
I think that is, I'm going to ask everybody to do a final comment, but that is the final intervention. What you just said, John, was where I would hope we would go. It doesn't matter if people agree or disagree with each other. You create social trust. You recreate community by starting to listen to each other and by actually being in community. And that the human being, our moral value must be that the human being takes precedent over the machine, and that we have an obligation. Now I'm preaching. I don't mean to, but we have an obligation as Americans. I have an obligation as the head of this great union to actually fight for human dignity and the human being to be front and center, and for the future to be about humanity and human beings. And that if we can get that in terms of the ethos again, and that's frankly what nurses and teachers do, and that's what I got from the poll, John, that frankly, Gen Z is a generation that wants to be involved, that wants to be engaged, that wants to have agency. And it wants these barriers to be gone so that it can fly. And I've seen that from generation to generation, from me in a baby boomer generation to each successive generation. And I think that you're hearing that, or at least I'm hearing that from both Zac and Madison. And so I just want to ask all three of you, just, any final comments about what we need to do going forward, voting, engaging in community, but any final comments in terms of how we help as our community to reignite the passion of Gen Z. Madison, I'll start with you this time. I'll go Madison, Zac, and then John.
Yeah, I think that young people nowadays need to remember just how important their voice is. I think young people need to speak up about their working conditions, speak up about their economic opportunities. If they feel strongly about these conditions and these opportunities, chances are other people also share those views. I encourage young people to not be scared to stand up to their employer. I encourage young people to not accept the conditions that are put in front of them without asking questions or without pushing back. And I encourage young people to not be scared of the potential for repercussions if you stand up for what you believe is right. I sleep very well at night, knowing that I am doing the best that I can to support my profession and support patients, despite the fact that I think Providence administration would much rather have me gone. I sleep very well at night, and I want young people to do the same.
Fantastic. And we are so honored that you are a member of our union and you do this work. Zac.
So first of all, everything that Madison said, you can also imagine that I said it. And also, I would like to say, so many of these issues are not specific to Gen Z, right? I think about how many people are worried about the cost of living, about the cost of groceries. Everyone's got to eat. The lessons that I learned about the impacts of, healthcare, I think, it's pretty universal at this point. Medicare for all is basically the only way forward. And some of the most powerful lessons that made me realize the impact of the fact that we have not gone down that route are from my coworkers who were way outside of my generation, right? And those were some of my wake up moments that make me go, oh my God. Right? The only difference between me and someone who's been around for a lot longer is that this is just all I've known my entire life. But I've found that in my local community and unions and teachers and everything, right? Even the people who are not in our generation are feeling the impacts, seeing the impacts, it's affecting all of us equally. So as much as I totally agree, stand up, hold firm, fight for your rights. That's what we have, and we should not let them take that away from us. Look for these elements of solidarity, right? It's not just old versus young. It's a group of individuals who consider themselves to be bosses, who consider themselves to be in control, versus the rest of us who are just trying to do what we've all been told since however long it was since we were young, that there is a middle class path forward, that if you do a job and work hard and try your best and work with dignity, that you'll be able to get a life that is satisfying and meaningful, and you'll be able to afford kind of the basic necessities. And those are all universal. And so, fight, protest, vote. If somehow you're listening to this and you are not part of your local union, how? But also go join, find out, get involved. And I think also for young people, you will realize that there's a lot of power in just kind of being focused and a little bit annoying and willing to get your nose into somebody else's business and say, well, I don't think that's right. I think it should be a different way. And you'll find a lot more people, both within our generation, without our generation, or rather outside of our generation, feel the same way. So just, continue to look for those opportunities and they'll come to you.
Thank you, Zac. And you just reminded me of our little ditty that together we can accomplish what is impossible alone. And John, you get the last word, my friend.
Thank you. So I think the last piece of business that we can remind ourselves is to remind all of our peers, younger and older, that when younger people vote, big things happen. Okay. Gen Z already votes, Randy, in better numbers than we did when we were their age. Okay. When we were younger. And that's a good thing. Okay.
That's a great thing.
That's a good thing. For me, never enough. Okay. Never enough. But let me tell you, I could go on for some time, but I'm going to give you one series of facts that would not have happened if not for Gen Z voting in 2020 in record numbers. Okay. If not for Gen Z, millions of young people, Gen Z, millennials, Gen Xers, had student loans relieved. Okay. To the tune of over $150 billion, close to $200 billion in student debt relief when Congress, Republican Congress, with the Supreme Court try to block it. That doesn't happen if young people didn't vote in record numbers and if younger people didn't use their political power kind of within the infrastructure to fight for the things that they cared about. You can make the same case for gun violence prevention, the first act in 2 generations, but those things don't happen unless younger people vote and are reminded of what can be accomplished when they do participate.
And you and I know, John, because how many times before those votes had we tried to get these kind of reforms? And it's true. When younger people vote, the future is in their hands. And in some ways, what I've learned from this conversation is not only do we have extraordinary folks in our union, I just can't thank Zac and Madison enough. But John, you've actually given me more hope about what was in the polling than when I first read it. Because underneath the sense of anxiety and instability is this yearning for agency and engagement, and to actually have a future that young people deserve, that frankly all Americans deserve. And that's what we, as teachers, as nurses, as unionists, fight for. But we fight for it together with each other, shoulder to shoulder. So I want to just really thank John Della Volpe, who is always kind of one of my teachers in terms of not just polling, but where society is going at so many different inflection points. Thank you, John, for all the work that you've done for all these years. I want to thank Zac Coe, not only for teaching math, but for also being so much a part of our union and seeing, the difference between when you have one and when you don't. And thank you, Zac, for being such an activist. And Madison, if I was ever sick and needed a hospital, I would want to be in your care every single moment. Thank you for your caring and your concern and for the sense of a path forward. And so this is Union Talk, and we've been talking about the Harvard Youth Poll and our members' perspectives on it and where Gen Z is right now. And thank you, all of you, for listening. I'm Randi Weingarten.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Union Talk. Remember to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and tune in every other week for a new episode. Thank you, be safe, and be well.